So what happens when the very architect of the global trade system looks like it might want to start tearing it down? It's a huge question, and today we're diving into a really bold proposal for how an alliance could defend open markets.
Now, all the analysis we're about to walk through, it comes straight from a policy brief published by the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, which is a top-tier research center for exactly these kinds of global economic challenges.
And, the brief just jumps right in with this incredibly powerful statement. It basically argues that the United States, the country that championed the global trade system for decades, is now the one threatening to pull the whole thing apart.
Okay, so what does this threat actually look like in the real world? We're not talking about something abstract here. We're talking about a wave of pretty aggressive new tariffs aimed right at some of America's closest allies.
And just look at the scale of these proposals. Seriously, these aren't small adjustments. We're talking a 30% tariff on the EU, 35% on Canada, and a mind-boggling 50% on Brazil. These are numbers that are designed to completely upend trade relationships that have been stable for years.
And here's the real kicker. In the past, countries would at least, try to argue that these kinds of moves fit within the legal framework of the World Trade Organization. But this time, the source says there's not even an attempt. It's a direct challenge to the entire rules-based system itself.
So you might be wondering, how are other countries supposed to respond to this? Well, the immediate impulse is for each country to try and cut its own deal, right, to protect its own backyard. But the Kiel Institute argues this is a huge strategic trap.
And this gets us to this core dilemma, something economists call a collective action problem. It's this situation where individually, every country has an incentive to just cut its own deal, mostly because they're afraid of being left behind. But when everybody acts in their own short-term interest, the whole group ends up way weaker. And listen, this isn't just a theory. The source points out that it's already happening. We're seeing countries get pressured into these really one-sided deals. Japan, the Philippines, Vietnam, they're all agreeing to things that kind of undermine their own interests and the whole idea of a level playing field.
The strategic choice here really couldn't be clearer. Going it alone, you have very little leverage, and you end up in a race to the bottom. But a coordinated response, well, that creates real, symmetric costs for the aggressor, and, just as importantly, it actually upholds the system in a legitimate, WTO-compliant way. The difference is just night and day.
Which brings us to the core proposal from the Kiel Institute, creating a strategic coalition, what they're calling an alliance for open trade. So who would be in this alliance? We're talking about a group of major economic heavyweights: the European Union, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, and South Korea. Together, that is a massive, massive economic bloc.
And their power really comes down to this one incredible number. Together, these countries are the destination for more than half, let me say that again, more than half of all U.S. goods exports. That is a level of economic leverage you just can't ignore.
And this creates what the brief calls an asymmetry of leverage. Think about it like this. The U.S. economy really depends on this group to buy its stuff. But for many of the members of this potential coalition, the U.S. is just one of many important markets. This imbalance, well, that's the coalition's greatest strategic weapon. Okay, so the leverage is there, it's real. But how would this alliance actually, use it? What are the mechanics here? Well, the data from their economic modeling is pretty compelling. It shows that a joint, coordinated retaliation doesn't just send a political message. It imposes a real economic cost on the U.S. that's 34% higher than if those countries just did nothing. That's a serious amount of economic pain, and it's designed specifically to change behavior.
And this pressure wouldn't be random. Not at all. The idea is to target some of the most visible and politically connected U.S. industries. We're talking about the auto sector, which is deeply tied to Canada and Mexico, pharmaceuticals and aircraft, which see the EU as a massive market, and of course, key agricultural exports like soybeans and corn. Hitting these sectors would create powerful domestic pressure inside the U.S. to rethink its strategy.
But, and this is absolutely crucial, the point of this whole strategy isn't to start a trade war. The source is very clear. The goal is to prevent one by making the cost of going it alone just too high. It's about restoration, not retribution. And the messaging would have to be crystal clear and completely unified. The alliance would need to say, publicly and repeatedly, this is not an act of aggression. These are temporary, they're proportional, they're defensive, and they will be removed the second the U.S. tariffs are rescinded. So really, the entire strategy boils down to these three clear steps. First, respond proportionately, using tools that are totally legal under WTO rules. Second, you have to offer a clear off-ramp, a way for Washington to back down without losing face. And third, the ultimate goal is simple. Just restore the system that's been the engine of global prosperity for decades. The brief finishes with this powerful sense of urgency. It argues that just waiting around to see what happens is probably the most dangerous thing to do. Any hesitation could be seen as weakness, and that would only invite more aggressive, more disruptive policies down the line.
And all of this leaves us with one final critical question to think about. In a world where the old rules are being openly challenged, is forming a united front like this, is it the only effective way left to defend the future of free and open trade? The answer to that could really shape the global economy for years to come.